Welcome back to the In the Lead show. My name is Jennifer Tsang, and today I am joined by Niiamah Ashong, Chief Sherpa and founder of Outlier's Edge, to talk about what it means to be an outlier and outlying leadership. So welcome to the show.
Jennifer, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes. Well, we had met, a couple months ago, and I knew from our first conversation that, I wanted to continue the conversation and also bring you on the show. So I'm really looking forward to all of your insights, especially around outlying leadership and how that applies to self-leadership and things people can do to become just better leaders of themselves. So before we get started, though, I'd love to know a little bit about you. So who are you?
Yeah, who am I? Well, I would say here, my name is Niiamah Ashong. Let me say that. And I think that's actually important, Jennifer, to start off with that, because for the last 20 years or the 20 years beforehand, I was known as Nemo. I was born Niiamah. My family calls me Niiamah, but as I was growing up, my teenage years, I came by and I took on a nickname of Nemo. It was given to me by my marching band mates. And, I'll be honest, I loved it. I loved it because it felt like people were bringing me in. I felt like I belonged. If you had a nickname, they're like, oh, they care about you enough that they gave you a nickname. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it was a very neutral name. Like Finding Nemo hadn't even come out at the time that I had gotten the nickname. And then it came out about 2 years later. And once it did, my life went on a completely different trajectory. Just like everyone knew me before I came into a room. I would go introduce myself to people as Nemo, and then they would catch it and they would lean in and be like the fish? I'm like, yeah, exactly. So it was like I was able to borrow the goodwill of Nemo. And I feel like that is important because what I didn't realize was that for years I worked in one of the top consulting firms on the planet right after college. I went from, I was doing retirement actuarial work there, very numbers process oriented. Then I moved into working in a tech company. And when I was working in a tech company in New York City, we were working on advertising technology. So but I was there, went from the mathematical element, the analytical element, to go starting to work in learning and development and culture. So my team's mandate was to foster the global culture of the organization. So to look at it and say, we have 1,100 employees across the organization in 25 different offices in multiple different countries. How do we still feel like one organization while still honoring each of the regional or local elements and how business is done and who the people are there. Yeah. What's interesting about that is that through this journey, I recognize for myself, and I think this speaks to who I am. I recognize a few things. One of them was that in all the different environments I was in, most of the environments I was in, I turned out to be one of the only Black people in that entire organization or in that field. So when I was doing the actuarial work, 2 to 3% of all actuaries at the time were African American. I actually got pulled into a focus group so that we can, by the governing organizations to go and address it. When I was working in tech, 2 to 3% of all people working in tech at that time were African American. We actually someone actually did some handcrafted stats on what it was like inside of our own organization, and it was like, oh, the numbers are holding up. So I've been someone who has traversed life more or less in this 2 to 3% range. I feel and I think this is where at some point it dawned on me that I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. There's something here, statistically, how is it that whenever there's a 2 to 3% average, or statistic, I'm there, right? And it came back where I realized that, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. I've kind of gotten here through the persona of Nemo. Nemo who makes things easy, Nemo who puts a smile on people's face, Nemo who has, and this is something I adopted a way of being that didn't honor all of who I was. So I'm going to be really honest. I found a really great way of adopting whiteness in order to be my version of that, in order to be seen as safe, put myself in a position where I wouldn't be disregarded before I entered the room, so on and so forth. And so that was intrinsically within me. And over the last few years, I've been really focused on just allowing that the fullness of me, the full expression of what I can bring beyond what I had felt was needed in order to be safe or to continue to be supported to the table. So I own my name now. I am Niiamah Ashong, right? I own being in the 2 to 3%. That's why I talk about outliers. I love this group of people. It's not just like about demographics, but this aspect of like, if you're one of the few, like, I get that world. I know what to do with it. And we have something really amazing to bring. So I focus my time now on finding and supporting and just championing these leaders who I truly believe are going to shape the next era of humanity. We need something different to take us to where we're going next. And so that's who I am. That's what I do. I'm a father. Like there's so many things, but that's who I am professionally. If you want to know a little bit more about me personally, I'm happy to bring that in too.
No, that's beautiful. And all I want to say is thank you for bringing your whole self to the world, because that only benefits everyone. And you obviously have a lot to offer, and only bringing part of yourself is not in full alignment and aligned to our purpose. And also talking about this outliers kind of edge in leadership, I feel like that's where a lot of the growth and the transformation is happening. So when you say that 2 to 3%, one of the things I was thinking about was, before we get into kind of that outlying leadership, like, what did you learn about yourself as you were going through that process over the last couple of years of really embracing your whole self?
Thank you, Jennifer. I think this is the meat of it all. One, I'm still learning, right? So one of the bigger things was just even recognizing like, oh, this is part of my journey in life. Like, there isn't I've arrived moment. I'm someone who continues to grow. I continue to challenge myself. I look for leadership I look for where my leadership is most needed. And I run into, for me, it's around loneliness and belonging a lot, right? I run into different levels of it. How can I continue to be me in this new space where they don't know me? And so forth. So I just wanted to start off by saying that the journey is still ongoing. And I also hope, as this conversation goes on, as much as I want to talk about like some of the concrete things people can do, I also want to talk about like the costs of it. And if you're good with that, because I think one of the things that when I started down this journey, one of the things that was most difficult to find was like, when I heard other people talk about like, be your authentic self, own yourself, show up fully in the world, like go on there. In the back of my mind, there were two things that were happening. When I was approaching it, I'm like, well, they all make it look so easy. There must be something wrong with me. I must be missing something. And then on the other side of it, like, I just didn't realize like how much it would challenge. Like it's a real like answering of a call. But the world really goes and says, are you willing? Let's put it this way. The investment might be a lot, but the rewards are even greater. But we are going to ask a lot of you. We're going to put you in places where you're going to have to like challenge yourself. You're going to have to like really be in uncomfortable situations. And are you courageous enough to go through it until you have the confidence enough to have it just seem like it's a part of you, you know? So that I would say that journey, let's leave it at that for now in terms of like two of the bigger insights right now, because those are the ones that I didn't feel were being spoken. One, you're never done, you know. And two, like there will be investments involved, like, you know, and I don't know, I had a conversation with someone where we were looking at my self-leadership and the way I was showing up in the world. And she just reflected back. It's like, oh yeah, so it seems like there's a cost to showing up this way. And my entire body melted. I just relaxed so much, because I'm like, that's it. It's the unspoken cost about this year. It always feels like I have to project out, you know? And it's like, actually, this hasn't been easy. This hasn't been easy. It's been worth it, but it hasn't been easy.
I love that. I love that you're pointing out the costs. When you said, I always look at it, it's not a destination, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey from my perspective, that perspective of just having that courage that you were talking about to really fully embrace ourselves 100%. And there might be some days where we're at 75, 50. I think it fluctuates, right? It's very fluid. But I agree. I mean, just in my own personal development journey, that has been the key, is what is the cost too? Because especially on social media and in this world we live in, where it's like we write books that say, here's how glamorous it is, and I know the answers of how to do things, but rarely do we talk about those costs, because you're right, there is a big price to pay to be fully human. And I don't think we as a society acknowledge that enough. And all experiences, right? No matter where you come from, who you are, we're all coming from very rich experiences that have impacted our lives. And we avoid at all costs the costs of really being fully human in many ways. So I appreciate you saying that. And I'm fully, I am more than open to talk about that, because I feel like, again, too much do I see on social media and out in the world that we're portraying how easy, how wonderful, how glamorous it is. But do you really understand what that person has gone through, what they might be overcoming on a daily basis just to show up in that space? And I feel like there's a difference also between projecting and almost like illuminating. Like when I'm projecting, it's like almost, I don't know, it feels like it's more of that ego driven kind of like, I want people to see me in a certain way. But when you can see yourself fully and without any of that ego, it's almost like it shines naturally. It's this natural, authentic kind of, I don't know, it just feels like illumination. Like you can illuminate the world with your light without necessarily having to put forth a lot of effort or a lot of like, bells and whistles to make it happen.
And Jennifer, I'm here smiling as you're talking, because when you use the word illumination, I talk to people about this here. No one's described it that way. So I just want to kind of point out for you, as this goes on, there's something about that word illumination. There's also like a quality in which you said it that like it feels very rich coming from you, coming through you. And that's something that like I'm like, oh, she owns illumination in a way differently than others. Like yeah, when you talk about projecting versus illumination, you'll find with me, I'm big on distinctions and nuance. I'm like, what's that 2 to 3% difference that like when played out over several years, like takes you to completely different areas, right? You talked about the projecting versus illumination. I have something where in my work I'll talk about being a brand versus a beacon, right? And so a lot of times we're encouraged, we're taught, we're told, like, unless you have your brand out in the world, what's your brand? What's the thing you want to put out into the world there? And when I think about the beacon is like, I'm lit. This is where I'm at. It's like this is where I stand. This is my domain. I am here. Like it is bright. It is like the world around me is illuminated, and you shall see. You shall see if you want. It is really readily available, and those that are drawn to that will come in as well. So when you say that, it really does hit me on multiple levels when you're talking about projecting versus illumination.
Yeah, no, I think it's a powerful skill, and especially for self-leadership. At least from my own experience, what I've learned is the more that we can embrace our whole selves, the more we can step into maybe that discomfort or the places that scare us, the more that beacon of light or that illumination or that just pure energy that comes from us naturally is available, right? I think we spend a lot of time trying to build a facade around what we want people to see and not necessarily allowing that facade to be almost more like a veil where people can see through it and see like the essence of who you are. And I feel like that's the process of kind of that journey that you were talking about. But there are a lot of costs that sometimes you can lose friends or family members, or you can do things that are really uncomfortable that might give you a lot of anxiety. I mean, whatever it is, but it's having that courage, like you said, to really step into that. And it feels very purposeful. Like, it's like, yes, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm a human being in the year 2022 here on this
Yeah.
earth. This is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah. Do you mind, like you brought up, do you mind if I bring in some distinctions as well as what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay. One of them is around the word cost. So you'll notice in this conversation, I'll use the word cost. I'll try and use it as like intentionally as I can. So I'll talk about on the journey. I'll usually use language around like their investments to make, because when I think about it, a cost, it's like I've paid something and I get something in return, and that's it. When I think about an investment, it's something that I put in something, but it's not only going to come to me one time, but it's going to continue to appreciate and grow. Right. So there's a little bit of that different relationship there. So you might see me like use that language. I'm using it really intentionally if I do that. On the other side, when I do think about costs, because like we have different ways of looking at it. It takes me to my actuarial days, and I haven't thought about this to this degree in a while. But I like to say and I think this is a part of the journey as well. It's like, as you continue to evolve in your self-leadership, everything you've done in life is important. You're like, every single experience you have can come into play. And right now, my actuarial experience feels like it's coming into play. And the two costs that come to mind right now when I think about that are sunk costs and opportunity costs. And so sunk costs, the idea of sunk costs is get into a place where regardless of what you have put into a venture, an endeavor, into something, that amount is gone, right? Whatever you've put in, it has happened, and it will not come back to you. Oftentimes it's used in relation to like, okay, it's time to let it go. It's a sunk cost. Let's just move forward and let it be. All right. I think about that. Like if we're talking about like the challenges and things, some of the sunk costs that I had was I was working to be a credentialed actuary. I had put in probably, I think, 6 to 8 years, if I can consider also my college days. I was my early 20s living in New York City. My friends were out there partying, and I remember it almost seemed like there was a test every Halloween. I'm like, what do you have against Halloween? Because my friends would be out there dressing up in costumes, and I'm sitting alone studying, right? But I got to the point where I knew like this was not me. This was not like I'm fine at doing the math. I'm fine at doing the process. I can make progress, but this wasn't me. And I had to pay a sunk cost to leave that entire, like all the progress that I had made while taking exams as an adult, all of that behind, in order to start getting more aligned with what it is that I truly wanted. So that's one cost that felt like came up. Then on the other side, there's the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost has been really helpful as like I've been pursuing self-leadership from a courage standpoint, which is like, okay, I could stay this way, but what am I going to miss out on, right? Like what's the opportunity that's missing? So you talked about friends, for example. All right, Jennifer, are you cool if I'm just like real with you here around
sure.
what's happening?
Yeah.
So as I'm going down this self-leadership journey, I've recognized that like loneliness is what shows up for me in different parts of it. One of the things that I'm getting more comfortable being uncomfortable and sharing is that I went to an Ivy League university, and one of their mottos was we're elite, not elitist. Elite, not elitist. And as time has gone on, I've been finding that I'm like, oh, I'm surrounded by people, but I'm still feeling lonely. Why is that? I'm surrounded by people, good people, well-meaning, well-intentioned people, but like something is missing. And for me, what was missing was that like elite game. I'm like we're not playing this at an all-star level. We're playing it to survive or to get by, and that's cool. But I need something more.
Right.
And that there, for me, I started to realize that like, oh, the opportunity cost that I was paying of like by not allowing myself to, essentially, I felt like if I showed up fully as I was, if I went for what I wanted, if I said things like elite, not elitist, that's not even it. If I said I went to an Ivy League organization, right? I feel like that I was like, that's going to cause a divide. I couldn't handle that, right? But what was missing was that I wasn't being a beacon, and I wasn't illuminated in the fact that I'm like, I like to play an all-star game. Anyone else out there that wants to play an all-star game, let's go and do it. So I have seen some people fall off from my life as I've been claiming more of what it is that I want as an owning more of my own self-leadership.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I've had so many amazing people come. I would not have met you, Jennifer, had I not
Mhm.
stepped into that claim, So it's a really interesting component. And I wanted to kind of break that out there when we think about cost, because otherwise it might feel heavier than it actually is. It's important, it's meaningful, but it's not something that doesn't need to be a sacrifice.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's connotation behind sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
That what's coming up for me actually was, do you see any opportunity in that sunk cost?
In many ways, I do. I think it's the element of living a life that's created, living a life where you really acknowledge that everything that you've done means something. Everything is meaningful, right? And so that's when I'm working with different leaders, when I'm working with my clients, when I'm working with people who are in the space of really trying to make a transition and trying to transform and trying to own all of who they are. A lot of us have been working towards something. We've been our identities are wrapped up in it as well. Our friends know us as this, it's the work that we did, and we put in money, we put in time, and we get to this place of well, if I'm not this, if I'm not known as this, then who am I? And I feel like that's where just being able to acknowledge some of the sunk costs. I am all the accumulations of these experiences. I'm still better at Excel than most people I meet. Even the people who are still to this day using it,
I believe it.
I won't even say how good I am, because I'm afraid people are going to come to me and ask me to do more.
I'm going to be hitting you up.
Yeah,
You're I can't figure out this formula. You need
I'm like, no, that was another life. But I use that for tools. I use that to do different analysis, to know how's my business growing, how's my impact in the world going from a numbers and metrics perspective. I'm working so this element of it truly becomes sunk if you put it down and forget about it. But I have a mentor, and he's to say, transcend and include. You might be going beyond it. You might have it might seem like you've left it behind, but the real thing is to find out the various nuggets that you can and bring it along the way.
Exactly. Because that's what creating that whole self experience, to me at least, means, is that anything that I've done in my life that may be a sunk cost, right? What can I learn from that? What can I bring with me? Because the more that we can bring with us, I think we can, what I call is integrate it into our whole selves, so that I think what feels true, at least to me, is the letting go part, is letting go of that attachment to maybe what was, or decisions that we made that maybe weren't, in alignment with who we were, or, we decided to go in a different direction. But really, I think sometimes we get really attached to, oh, geez, I spent 8 years of my life studying for this exam, or, whatever. And then I didn't end up actually going for it. Wow, that was a waste of time. I can't believe I did that, and blah, blah. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole there, but I think it's a matter of really honoring what we were able to experience, what we were able to learn, and then use those as opportunities, like you said, to transcend. I love that word, because I always look at it like the transformation process is it's a transcending process, where it's we're constantly kind of pushing forward, but we're also pushing up. It's I'm always trying to get to that next level of whatever that means for me as far as my growth and transformation. But that includes all of it, right? It's not about well, in college I played basketball, I can't ever think about that again. I'm leaving that behind. I never became a WNBA star. So, but it's well, what did I learn from that experience? And what opportunities maybe did it give me that actually put me on this path? One of the things I'll share with you that was coming up for me as far as that sunk cost was, and I was just talking to my therapist about this on Friday, I was saying, 15 or 16 years ago, when I started on my kind of this personal transformation journey, I've been in therapy for basically the last 16 years. I told her, I was at the time, I didn't understand why I was doing it. I just had this intrinsic urge to do it. And I just went with it. I was fine, I'm going to do it. And along the way, I've learned a lot, but in the beginning, it felt like that sunk cost, where it was gosh, I'm paying all this money. I'm going there every 2 weeks. I'm not really seeing the value. When's this ever going to, turn my life around? What's it about? But now looking back 15 to 16 years later, I see all of the opportunities and how it was really laying that foundation so that even though maybe in the moment we didn't either take the opportunity or see the path, I think the path is being laid for us and it's there. It just took me some time, I think, to really see it and really embrace it and really fully embrace the path that I'm on now. And therapy is a great mental health for me is a big thing for many years. That was part of me that I didn't want to accept, that I didn't want to live and fully embrace. But as I've started to really embrace that more and more, I can see all of the opportunities that were there. And at the time, it may have felt like a sunk cost, but it was actually more of an opportunity for me to kind of just, and from a self-leadership perspective, just do the really big work that has helped me kind of transcend some pretty big events that have happened in my life, that have brought me to where I am today. So for me, it's about embracing all of that and just, I don't know. I mean, for me, that's what it feels like when I'm trying to be whole and really owning all of that. It's about owning all of it, even the mistakes, even the doubt, even the, I don't know. Does any of that resonate with you or?
Resonates. There's a lot that resonates with me.
Yeah.
You use the word integrate. Integrity is my highest value, and to me,
And too.
it's one of those where if you look at the etymology of it, it's similar to integer, right? Integrate. It's to be whole. It's like the whole numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so and this is where I think about outlier leadership, like self leadership, whatever you want to call it, right? Where it's like the leadership of just being you out in the world and choosing to remain solid in that foundation. I feel like that's a whole process of integrating the fragmented parts of ourselves, and allowing ourselves to be whole regardless of the environment that we're in. It's not I'm one way with my family and another way at the work, and I'm another way with this group of friends at work, and I'm another way with these people. It's like I'm just me. This is it. You get the whole package. Everything's integrated and I'm in integrity. I am whole. So that really resonated. You also brought up something I think that's really important, which is the support that we get along this journey as we're on our transformation journeys. I think there's a lot of both stigmas and also I don't know what the right word is around it, but there's this depiction of what it looks like to be a leader, what it looks like to if you have it or you don't.
Right.
Another thing my mentor says is that we often compare how we feel on the outside, on the inside, with how they look on the outside.
Yeah.
And so when I hear you talk about support, that really, really resonates as true. Whether for me, I've done coaching, but I've also done masterminds, and I've had one-on-one, I've had groups, I've been large communities. I sometimes I'll go onto a Facebook Live, and I'm like, I don't want to make a message out into the world unless my body is shaking, because unless my nervous system is rejecting it, because there's something in that moment that if I'm willing to put out into the world with whoever I need to, right? It's going to help me get to one step further to more integration, one less thing that I'm trying to hide. And I just think it's just important, regardless of where you go for it, what modality you use, whether it's therapy or whatever it is. I think it's just important that we get support along the way. And we're met with people who can support us at the level that we need. Maybe it's a level of depth. I'm playing with a place of co-creation right now, where when I'm taking outlier leaders, I'm like, you've been able to be personally successful at but what happens, but what if you didn't have to do it alone? What would happen if you were with others who are also playing the same 2 to 3% game? What kind of support can you bring to each other? What kind of inspiration, so on and so forth? That's a different degree of support, but it's this whole idea of we don't need to do it alone. And to get, there's that really, really resonated here. And it felt like it was being called out of me when you said, it's just a deep resounding yes internally.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I love that. I love that you said you're not alone, because I feel like honestly at the core, in a lot of my coaching as well. And when I'm talking with leaders and even just having conversations with friends, I feel like the question they are always asking at the core is, am I alone? And I feel like, especially in leadership, especially in corporate, you've been there too, right? Like, I feel like we're really over rotated into problem solving. And a lot of times I like to ask my leadership team is, what do you think they're really trying to say? Because a lot of times where their minds go is like, we need to help them understand the strategy. We need to connect the dots. We need to make sure they understand the vision. And I'm like, no, what do you think they're really trying to say? Because I think at the core, what most people are asking themselves is, am I alone? And the co-creation process I love. I mean, that's why coaching is so wonderful, and therapy and other, similar modalities, is that you aren't alone. And if we can bring that safety into the space so that people feel like they aren't alone and like they belong, I think there's even a level of healing. And that's what I love, especially about the therapy journey for me, is like, having been through some pretty big traumas in my life, that I've been able to not only develop myself personally, but develop some deeper level of healing around that, to develop, which it also in turn helped develop my own personal leadership. And I think that if we can answer that question for people, so that every time they ask you, am I alone? The answer is no, we are together. We are here in this space, you belong. I think there's something even healing about that, where people get it. And it's this deep, like, compassion and empathy that shows us really at the end of the day that we're humans and we're all connected. And that's a great way to really pause and take that time to really answer that question for somebody. Because I believe it firmly that that is the question that most people are asking in almost any situation. Am I alone? And anything we can do as coaches, as leaders, as therapists, educators, parents, to answer that question, I feel like we would see a much different world, personally.
I'm deeply resonating with this. But you did not know is that my number one fear is being alone.
Yeah,
I
most
was able
people
to,
it is, right? I
yeah,
mean, yeah, you're not
yeah.
alone in that either.
I'm not
Yeah.
alone. And that's like, and that, I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that's been really interesting. It's like, it's, am I alone? Am I the only one that's thinking this in the room here? If I said this, if I went out on a limb, would I be alone? Would anyone else have my back?
Mm-hmm.
You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
as you were saying this and talking about being alone, like it's at the core of what I do in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Like when I think about self-leadership, it's like, it's being able to answer that question, like,
Yeah.
and in the deepest part of, like, it's almost like there's like a paradox to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the answer is yes and absolutely not at the same time,
Mm.
I think about this here a lot. Because I think this is
Yeah.
why I look at like the cost and all this stuff. What's coming up for you? I can see like you're thinking about some things. I'm kind of curious before I go on.
Yeah. No, when you said yes and no, that is so true, because when you were talking about it being alone, this is something, loneliness is something that I've contemplated a lot just in therapy. And just as you get older, I find that like our worlds get smaller, and, you may have less friends, but they might be deeper connections. Right. But I'm personally someone, I don't know, I like solitude, and I personally don't struggle a ton with like feeling lonely, or like I need people around me, or friends, or talking to people. But that is something that I think it's both. It's yes and no at the same time. I think it's an internal question we're always asking ourselves. One thing my therapist tells me that has been a practice that I love is, she's like, when you start to ask yourself that question, you make the U-turn. So when we start to want to project out, this goes for anything. You start to project out, that's a perfect opportunity to turn back inward to ask, what are you missing? What is coming up for you? What are you feeling? What traumas might be getting triggered? So I think it is true, like you said, it can be both at the same time. And I think that that whole idea is present in almost everything. There can be multiple things true at the same time. And I think that's where nuance comes in too.
I like that. You just gave me something to think about here, because it's usually I'll get into conversations and people are like, well, we can do from both sides. And I'm like, there's so much more. And when you describe like that whole idea right there, I'm like, that's
Mm-hmm.
it. And the wholeness and the totality of it all, and the completion of it all, it's so much more full, so much more rich than just two.
Yeah.
And this gets me to something here, like, because like, look, I I go out of my way to find people who have done things differently, people who have like stood out from the crowd, who are like, they're not supposed to be there. Like, it's like somehow they're there. They may not feel it, but like on paper, like they've created success against the odds, right?
Yeah.
And they're looking to say like, what's going to come next? And when that happens, like there's this element of, it's a weird thing that works for me. It's like this paradox. It's like all I'm ever helping someone do, and no matter whatever we call it, like all I'm ever helping someone do is just like to feel more, to embrace and own more of who they are. But when I play that out, if I take that out to its fullest extent, because I do that at times, I'm like, if I was actually successful with everything that I did and every person I talked to embraced fully who they were, well, then what would that mean? Well, then that will get that person to being the one and only, I'll use myself, the one and only Niiamah Ashong on the planet, right? In this planet of 7+ billion people, right? There's only one of me. And that is like, so like can you feel more alone, and can you feel more like if you really look at it, right, it is like, that's part of the courage. It's part of like the investment. Like, are you willing to be alone on that front? And then it continues on there, right? So like I want to say it like it's a big ask, like to say like, are you willing to be the one, you know? And then the thing becomes, well, what if everyone was the one? But we still we wouldn't be alone. What's here? And this is where I found like my I call it my unconventional truth. It's like most people think one thing, but the truth is something different. And do you mind if I share it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. One of the unconventional truths that plays out a lot in my life is most people believe that the way to bring people together is to find out what we have in common and what our similarities are. But the truth is, the real way to make people come together, the real way to help them belong, is to celebrate and value what makes them different. And it's like, it's more about like giving space and saying, wow, Jennifer, you've had your experience here. You've done this, you've played basketball, you've done this, you've done that. Like that wasn't a part of the equation before. You know, we didn't have anyone who's had your experiences in our lives before. Now that you're here, a whole new world of opportunities have become available for us that weren't there beforehand. And so it's this really interesting juxtaposition of what it really means to own that. And how, if that's the case, and I think we need to look at some of the ways that we are approaching life, leadership, togetherness, inclusion, and so forth from a different angle, such that we're able to continue to foster in more of what's different. And I think that also gives us space to know, at least I'll say this for me, it has been one of the key paths to me finding belonging in myself, to go and say, like, to walk into a room and know in the back of my mind, I'm going to enter, it's a bit uncomfortable for me to say it, so I'm going to say this, but to know in the back of my mind, I'm like, hey, you all are welcome. Niiamah is now in the room. There's something here that couldn't have been done before I was here. And so immediately, like as soon as I entered the room, there's something of value that I have to bring. And it's just me, you know, it's like just that simple. Curious if anything is popping up for you on that, like when I say that.
I love that, the celebrating the differences, because one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about being in the 2 to 3%, if we're trying to find what's common, we can be leaving out big parts of people and also not really acknowledging what is there and what is obviously different. And that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like we do, especially in DE and IMB, I don't know. I feel like we're missing a huge piece. And I feel like it's more of the discomfort. Folks don't necessarily want to maybe lean into or really embrace that discomfort. That might be like, hey, we haven't been doing things really well, and it's been impacting these people in this way. And there's differences there, and that's okay. Now the question becomes, what can we do about it? And how can we have different conversations, make the space safer so that people feel comfortable enough to bring all those parts of themselves, and acknowledging, and I think what you said hits it on the head, is like just really acknowledging that there are differences And that is actually what makes life really beautiful, like you said, because there is only one you, there's only one me, there's only one of each of us. And all of those differences, I think we're missing out on an opportunity to really um, integrate. How I'm, again, always seeing everything, even organizations, is how do we integrate all parts of the organization, from the executive down to the individual contributors. We all need to be integrated so that we feel like we belong, we're safe, and we can embrace those differences. And in those differences actually comes a lot of innovation, a lot of new ways of thinking, new ways of doing, new ways of being, new conversations. So I'm 100% in alignment with you that I'm not about necessarily seeing like, let's find the same, like where we all kind of align, but let's look at all those fragmented parts and start putting the pieces back together to make that integrated whole. I just see, I mean, my question to you would be like, what do you see as being some of the roadblocks as to why, especially maybe in organizations, why people are maybe afraid of kind of stepping into that space?
Yeah. Okay. Let's have that conversation. What I would say here is this, like, you said the word afraid. I think we have to look at fear. Fear is
Mhm.
is at the core of it all, and it looks different for different people. All right. It looks different for different people. So, um, and now I say a lot of these conversations feel like there's landmines everywhere, where it's like if you say the wrong thing in front, like you could step on something.
Yeah.
And I think, and so the area of it is, in terms of the roadblocks, I think it's like the it's this element of like, I don't want to offend. I'm piecing this out here because I'm actually thinking about specific people who I've worked with that have had like different challenges with, and the roadblock has looked different for
Yeah.
for
Sure.
them. So
Mhm.
some roadblocks I've worked with, white men who have progressed very quickly in their career, who then get to a place of saying like, okay, I want to have this conversation, I want to show up and celebrate the differences in this way, but like two things are running through my like I'm a privileged person, like they're in the space of saying, of acknowledging their privilege, and like, well, how do I actually like create the space for this conversation? Should I be in the leadership of it all?
Mm.
That like that shows up there. But on the other side of it, and this is when we really get a chance to be real, it's like, have I actually earned this spot? Like, am I actually as
Mm.
good as what I think I am? I know I'm in the role, but like everyone, like what I'm hearing around me is that like I might have gotten this just because I'm tall, or my skin color, or because of like the gender I was born with at birth. Like there's all these different things. Like
Yeah.
and like there's fear of having of being confronted, having to like answer that question, like, how good am I really? Like, what's the value that I'm really bringing? That's one way of seeing it.
Yeah.
There are other times where it comes up, and do you take something? Okay.
That's okay.
There are other sides where it will show up from a standpoint of um the roadblock being, well, like almost like it's like the idea of safety, but it not actually being there. I typically say, if someone says it's a safe space, I'm like, okay, it's not safe. If like that's typically my, I'm like you have to do the work to create the safety. And in that the space would be there. But I think at the end of the day, like the fear is the roadblock. And like, no matter how we look at it, we'll all have our own different ways that it manifests. um
Mm.
but I think the core of it is like what is keeping us from our deeper levels of integration and wholeness are
Mhm.
various degrees of fear.
Yeah.
What if I say this? I talk to leaders in organizations, and they're like, what if we make a decision this way and it offends someone, or today it was the right decision, then tomorrow like we find
Mm.
out that like, ooh, we were on the wrong side of history for however long history lasted, until it
Yeah.
changed again. And so this is why I talk a lot about courage right now, because it's like it does take, it's not about eliminating the fears. It's
Yeah.
about like, can you go and work through something with like in a different way. And the last thing I'll say around it in terms of the roadblocks is that like we have we haven't lived we haven't had like generations or decades of experience of seeing like what happens when you embrace something. So like, it's like what we've been taught and what we've experienced is one direction. It's like, and now again, we have to be courageous enough to go on a ledge and say, but I think there's something better. I know that there can be something more. We don't just have to converge with the same problems that we're solving. We can have something new emerge with a new possibility that we want to create together. And how do we courageously step into that together, so that we know that we have each other's back, that we will be making mistakes along the way. It's part like transformation. Like for me, my transformation journey has always had a huge period of messiness. Anytime that I'm not embracing that, then we know that there's not real transformation taking place. How does that sound? Does that feel?
No,
like,
that
anything else
feels
you would
right.
add on to it?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say also adding on to that with that last piece is, I often say like, I can always feel right before a big kind of, I don't know, I'm transcending maybe another piece of this transformation journey. There's always some big event happening where I'm feeling really uneasy. Like it almost feels like the universe comes in and just kind of shakes things up. And I'm like, whoa, what's happening? Like almost right before that moment when you kind of like get through it. And then you feel like you're almost at this new place where you're like, okay, I got through that. And you've kind of gone through the process. And as you start to develop more self-awareness, I've noticed like you can actually start to see it, and you can start to see like, it's almost like an earthquake. You feel kind of the pre-shock or whatever, where it's like, okay, there's a little jolt, and then you're like, okay, I know something's coming. Like there's some big, or it doesn't even have to be big, but you can start to notice kind of how life is almost kind of preparing you, and you can see that whole process. I've definitely, especially in the last few years, really been able to lean into that and go, oh, I see when this happens. Usually that's life kind of not testing me, but kind of challenging me in a way to go, okay, are you ready for, maybe the next, growth opportunity? So that's one thing I'll say. Going back to fear though, when you were talking about safety and that integration, big part of integration for me is understanding trauma. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people, and I think we all are, going through and reacting based on triggers or traumas that we've had in our life. And this is something I talk to my leadership team a lot about, even going through things like organizational changes or making, different changes just broadly, not huge impact, not people impact, but just changes in direction. Understanding the impact and how that's going to trigger people, I think, is really an important way to be able to develop more of that belonging and embracing the differences, because everybody has a different response. And as a leader, I don't say you have to be a therapist. You don't need to necessarily understand their trauma, but understand that trauma exists. And part of the integration is finding ways to either talk directly to that trauma or that person who's going through that reaction, and finding ways to be that support for them. So I think that was what was coming up for me, was when you're in these uncomfortable conversations where you might have to ask yourself, oh, did we make the wrong decision? Like, again, it's bringing all of that with you, but also understanding I might be having a trauma response. Someone else might be having a trauma response, and just kind of seeing that. And I don't know, for me, again, I've seen that there's a way that we can be really effective as leaders in organizations if we can recognize that. Like recognize that people are responding based on things that either they've been through or it's touching on things that have really impacted them. And that's okay. Again, embrace those differences. But when we go like, oh, I'm not going to really think about that, that's not my business, like, your issues are, not work related, I think we create more of that divide in organizations that I've seen. But if we have the courage to just own it and say, yeah, I mean, I can see that this is really hard for you and this is impacting you, and give them that support and have that in mind as you're developing the strategies of how you're going to roll out change, or how you're going to roll out different programs, or how you're going to communicate to people. Have that in your mind, that people are going to be having those responses. That to me also creates part of that integration, because we can't ignore that a lot of people are either suffering or struggling or having a response based on something that you're doing or saying. Acknowledge that, own it, and find ways to integrate it and support people so that you can also help them kind of transcend as well. Now, I don't know how any of that lands with you, but that was something that was kind of floating in my mind as you were talking.
Yeah. I like in this moment, I'm choosing not to like let it land. I wanted to let it continue to like to evolve and let the ripples of it come out. Yeah, I feel like there's actually more to keep growing and expanding on. What I'm feeling here is like a deep level of like intentionality and care that's brought into the leadership, and a level of understanding and compassion to say like let us proactively take into account that like people are people here. We don't like if they were machines or they were just like computers, it'd be a different thing, you know.
Right.
But we are humans, and we are humans who work. You know, and this could be work. It could be play. Hey, this is like you're leading a sports team. You're leading like there's so many different ways that this can happen when you're leading people, right? And I think that's one of the when I'm hearing from you here, it's like this is part of what we are signing up for in our society at this time. Like to truly be in the lead right now. Like there's an element of knowing that like let us honor people's experiences, and as leaders let us create ways for people to honor those experiences for themselves, whether it may seem in the like I talk about like time of the big T and time of the little T, and the little T is like the right now time.
Right.
It might feel like, hey, we're slowing things down to go and address something that doesn't feel really pertinent to the work, whereas time in the big T is like they're like, wow, this organization is at least taking the time they're trying. They're intentional about it. You know, I don't know where else I wouldn't want to take my skills, take these experiences that I've had and bring it somewhere else, because I'm not willing to lose. I cannot. I know that I have a manager who is at least cares, and we can find a way to navigate that. Doesn't mean they're getting it right, but we're navigating that. And I think that this goes into the element of, I talk about like be courageous. Do you mind if I like share like one of the things that has been like helpful to actually help like step into that courage?
Love to.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, like there comes an element of I call it creating agreements. It's really, now as I do this more, I'm like, create your space. It's interesting, but I think of like organizational culture, especially as like it's like a game. Like you can go do the same work in different organizations, but they play the game differently. They're like, this is what we reward. This is how we like hire. This is what we're looking for, and this is the values that we build everything on. So one thing that I have found when it comes to like being more courageous or stepping into courageous elements is to create your space intentionally with the people who are directly in front of you. So what that might mean is like, let's say, Jennifer, if you and I were in a position where it's like, oh, I need to say something, and it feels like, and like my heart's feeling hot. I have my own way where my nervous system says like, yo, there's something nearby. I might like pause it and just like, hey, Jennifer, like, I would love to like just create like an agreement with you here, because like I'm working right now on really stepping into a place of like owning my truths and owning and being in a place where I'm allowing my leadership to transcend like what makes me uncomfortable, so that the two of us are able to get like the possible result that's possible. Are you good with me in this part of the conversation, just like sharing and owning my truth without me having to like, you know, I don't know, trying to make you, I don't know, it's me also honoring you by like saying like, I know that you can handle it, but let me just check in with you, and rather than just like assume, like, can we just make this into an agreement? Is this something that you'd be open to in this conversation? And so in doing that, it's for me, it creates a space of like, I'm going to say something, I'm going to do something, I'm going to behave in a way that is going to take something out of me. Let's just create an agreement. Let's create the space where this is no longer a detriment, or we can like actively know that, hey, if something happens here, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. And I think that creating different agreements, and what I would say is creating your space, it has been one of the biggest game changers for me in my leadership journey overall, my others' leadership, my self-leadership, because there are things that I am working through that I know that on the other side, like I know I have to get to it, go work through it to get to the other side. And it's eventually you get to the place where it's no longer courageous, and it's just the way that you enter into conversations, and it just feels like, for new people, it feels like it's always been you. But that has been one of the strongest tools that I have. I call it creating agreements for people, in kind of like the more like, almost like the more bulleted form. But really for me, it's like creating the space, creating a conversation, and saying, like, just because we've defaulted, it's getting out of the default of what it is, getting out of the default of people's assumptions, the way that their expectations, the way that they think it needs to be, the way they think it needs to play, and say, hey, by the way, we are leaders in this space with one another, and we can create this in a different way.
Yeah, I love that. What I hear you saying is vulnerability, and also leveling the playing field almost, which is something that I'm intrigued by. One of the things that I think about, especially in organizations, of why it feels so hierarchical and why it feels almost parental in a way, where it's like, it feels like you're almost co-creating and leveling the playing field and saying, hey, we're equals and we're coming to the space and we are mutually agreeing on, what that space is going to look like and what to expect. I mean, I think that's beautiful, but I think I was hearing vulnerability as like a key aspect and element of that.
Yeah, you really nailed it. It's like there's two parts of it. I'll come back to the like leveling the playing field part, because it is separate. But I think what it is that in that creating a space, it creates a space while you're in that courageous mode to create the space for vulnerability to live more openly, and for you to not be in reaction mode, and the other person not to have to be in reaction either. It just gives you both a chance to respond, and say, like, okay, you know what? I ask some questions when I meet people, when I'm coaching them for the first time. I say, I'm going to hide nothing and hold nothing back from you. Are you good with that? I've yet to get someone say, no, I prefer for you to hide something.
Right. No, please.
Right? Please. Right. But at the same time, there are things that I say later on in the conversation that like could feel really, I'm meeting people for the first time and we're having these conversations within 5 minutes. Some people are having their breakthroughs. They're like, and it's because we're able to get to this level of we're able to create something different. We're able to, and it signifies a way of saying, like, hey, here goes something that's different between us. So a lot of times someone might do it by like saying, let's create some ground rules and all that. I think, like, unfortunately, with some like the ground rule stuff here, we missed that stage of co-creation. It's almost like you've entered my space and this is how I want it to be, as opposed to let us create our space. And this is what I'm going to, I often use those agreements when I'm creating a space to specifically make okay the thing that I internally think is not okay. I'm like, I often say to people, I'm like, I'm here to serve you, not please you. It's a reminder to me. It's not, it's like, hey, are you ready to be served? Like, I'm not going to please you. That I thought it was for, I thought for the longest time it was for someone else when I was creating the space, but it was actually me giving myself not just permission, but like holding myself accountable to playing at a higher standard and saying, I have committed to this person, that I'm going to serve them in this conversation. And here I am people pleasing right now. Let me call that out. Hey, sorry, I made a commitment to you that I would serve rather than please. What you saw there, the last 10 minutes was me actually in my people pleasing mode. And I just caught it. So if I'm going to truly serve you, and then I deliver it.
Yeah. I think that is a process, right? And it feels like life. I mean, everything in life feels like that process is we can make those agreements. And sometimes, maybe we slip out of that agreement and we can realize it, recognize it. I think the process for me is how quickly can we notice those things? It's like, it's not about being perfect all the time. It's about noticing when we may not be holding up our end of the agreement, or when we might not be coming into the space in a certain way. Can we catch ourselves? And then can we hold ourselves accountable, and can we acknowledge it? Right. Because I feel like that feels like a whole process to me, what you were describing. No, it's beautiful. And I agree, because I know a lot of people have that like pleaser kind of mentality of wanting, to make others happy. But I feel the service part is what's missing. And I like that you kind of make that distinction. Now, did you have something you wanted to share on the other piece as well, as far as?
There was something else I wanted to share about leveling the playing field.
Yeah.
I think it really just gets down to the idea of co-creation. One of the things that has been showing up for me recently, it's in that space of I've been looking at collaboration versus co-creation. I do have a distinction there where it's like the way I hold it is that I choose co-creation. I see collaboration as there's 100% here, and we're each going to bring in our percentages. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 60-40, but let's collaborate to create this thing 100%. Co-creation is I'm going to bring 100% of me. Yeah. And you're going to bring 100% of you. And we're going to create something that's going to be larger than the two of us together. We might get to 400 or 500% of what either one of us could have done alone. That's a nuance that I hold. That's not necessarily like different people will have different ways of feeling around that. That's less important than like the invitation to bring people in to meet you in partnership, in true co-creation there with you. And it's something that like, even in an organization with like, even with the, the hierarchies that are in place and the structures that are in place, and like, it's something that can still work. And it goes back to the idea of celebrating and valuing differences, right? It's like, let us create space for your experience or whatever else that you have to contribute to this conversation. Mm-hmm. Let's create the space for that to be valued. Ultimately, it may still be my responsibility, or I might be accountable for making the end decision here. But let's bring more of you into the pool of this conversation, so that when the decision is being made, it at least is informed with more of you in the space. So I like that, because I think sometimes like people are like, we don't have a flat organization. I don't want people. It's like, okay, I understand that. What we're doing right now is like we're actually creating a higher sense of ownership. And a higher sense of co-creation in there, whereas someone can now meet you not doing what you are doing, but bringing what they can bring to contribute toward what you are both creating, or what all of you are creating. That to me is the element that really it's like let's invite what it is that you bring that no one else on this team can bring, and let's do that to get to our shared results, goals, objectives in a meaningful and easy way.
I love that you're saying that. I'm smiling so much because every time you say invitation, that's like my word that I use so much for how I see so much of life's experiences is about, it's that invitation. It's life really is, even when you're going through a messy experience, it's really inviting you to have an experience. And what that's saying is, like you said, it's that co-creation process. It's that we are together creating something that, like you said, can be bigger than ourselves. And I just love when you say invitation, because that's how I look at it as well, is like, it's this invitation for us to come together to, create something or have a discussion, or to bring everyone together so that it creates that belonging, right? And that safety, and that all the things that we were talking about earlier, where you feel like my voice counts and what I have to say matters. And again, reinforcing that I'm not alone, like we are together. There's an element, it feels like, of that connection when you're invited, when there's that invitation. So that was why I was smiling. So
I'm glad you brought it up. Like, that's invitation is very important to me. It's like language is important. There's a difference between absolutely. I challenge, I invite, I'm asking. Like, there are all these different. Ultimately, it might feel like the same thing. It might seem like the same thing, but they feel very different. And it calls people into the experience in different ways. I think it is the job of a leader to create more leaders. I think it's the job of the leader to find the gifts that are on the margin and bring them into the center. That's that came from Peter Block, one of my mentors that I follow. He wrote the book Flawless Consultant, and then one of the books that means a lot to me, Community: The Structure of Belonging. Like, that is, and he says in there, it's like the gift, like the job of the leader is to help bring the gifts from the margin and bring them into the center. Right. And that to me is like another process of integrating, to make whole, to take that which was fragmented and put outside on the outside and say, actually, this also belongs. Let's bring this into contribution as well.
Yeah. And that goes back to self as well, too. The more I feel like we can integrate ourselves, the more I feel like we can then help to be that change and that integration for others and on larger scales and communities and organizations. So for me, it's always goes back to self, right? Like, how can we find ways to integrate all parts of ourselves more so that we can be more whole and own it, like you said. And then it's kind of weird. I don't know if you've noticed this. But the more I've done that, I find that people naturally kind of gravitate towards that. Like there isn't really this forced, like you don't have to force people to like see that ownership that you're talking about. It almost kind of naturally happens. And people, they feel that. They can be inspired by that. They can be activated by that. So I think the more that we can spend time really integrating ourselves, we can inspire and activate that same integration around us. It's just really inspiring. This was a great conversation. Honestly, I think I could talk to you for like 6 more hours. This was fascinating. And I love talking about kind of that outlying leadership and self-leadership. And especially when you're talking about that co-creation process. Where can people find you out on the web and out in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on every platform as at Niiamah Ashong. So if you're looking to follow me specifically, some of the work that I do, some of the thoughts that I have, and the like, I like to, my way of giving and sharing and teaching is often through like examples. So like even today, we're going to talk about outlying leadership. I'm like, I'd rather just be an outlier leader, you know, and have this experience be the stepping into what does it look like to be in a space as you, and let that be the demonstration. So I have a lot of like recorded conversations that I'll do different where I'm actually coaching people who've agreed to be there as a part of a resource. So anything with at Niiamah Ashong, that's Niiamah Ashong. You can find me. Yeah, you can find, that's the website. That's all that, everything that's there. And then we're also building out things around Outlier's Edge, which is really where we're focusing on championing the leaders who are shaping the next era of humanity. And we're helping them with like some of the major issues that work for people who have been one of the only, one of the few, one of the first, or one of a kind in most of the things that they do. Like they're in their version of the 2 to 3% club, and it goes beyond the demographics. So they were providing different like resources and different ways to help them with like their vision, like the strategy to bring it to life, the mindsets and the doubts and fears, and you know the courage that's involved with it. So we take a look at all of these different components, and we just find different create different resources, and we do it in a way. One of the things I love about that experience is that we do it together. It's a co-creative environment, and we say, okay, we know that you can be individually great. We're going to continue to help you with your self-leadership. We're going to continue to help you be a leader for others, and then we're going to help you be a leader with others. And that's like a whole other game, to be in a space where you are lifted up. So everything around that is under Outlier's Edge. outliersedge.com and all the other, I would say, handles around that. I have a gift here for In the Lead listeners. Do you mind if I share that?
Would love that.
Awesome. So one of my things is that I realized like I'm about experience. I can talk about these things here, but it's like people talk like I want confidence. I'm like, well, like the path to confidence is by gaining the experience, and so let's help you gain that. And so I have a community where I do like community coaching. I bring together some other outliers to and challenge their thinking, look at things differently. But the beauty of it is it's more than me. Like it's every person in that group is in there, like looking at things from different perspectives. We're working on, we have these different times that we meet in a given week. And I wanted to offer to In the Lead listeners an opportunity to come in for 2 weeks, for 14 days and experience it for themselves, and just like not just have that experience, but get the experience of being truly supported, get the experience of being like held accountable to be in you. That is, I'm like, we don't care about any of your goals. You can bring it in here. We're never going to ask and say, did you do the thing? We're going to ask you who you were being along the way. You know,
that's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So if someone's interested in that, they can just go to niiamahshon.com/in-the-lead. And it'll redirect them to a place where they can get 14 days complimentary access that's my gift to anyone that's listening here and just saying, I want to just continue down the self-leadership journey. If there's any way that I can support, I'm in for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes so that people can easily find you and find your wonderful gift. Thank you so much. Honestly, it was a pleasure talking to you today and exploring what it means to be a leader. So thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. It was an absolute pleasure.